Okay, thank you, Pamela, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us this morning. This was an interesting discussion, and certainly I want to make 4 points just from what I've heard. And certainly as we look at the index, what we heard from the EIU this morning was that there are key areas that help us to measure resilience. And what are those? And I think both from Pat and from Harry, you heard that perhaps they were divided into 2 categories, the short term and the long term. And in the short term, that we look at food consumption as a share of household expenditure. And interestingly, here we had a panelist from Ethiopia, one from Switzerland, the 2 countries that Harry seemed to focus a lot on. But we all understand as well that change and that dynamic in terms of how much expenditure gets placed on food as a percentage of total household expenditure is very critical. The second one is that the presence of food safety net programs, that also becomes very important as we look at which of these countries or which countries are better able to prepare their citizens to be more resilient to shocks. In terms of the long term, what we heard is that public expenditure on R&D is quite important. And rightly so, as we look at the Maputo Declaration, there are only a few countries now that are actually meeting their obligations under that declaration. And we're happy that while we're here in Ethiopia, Ethiopia is one of those countries that is actually meeting that. The second was agriculture infrastructure. And that we looked at infrastructure around storage, around transportation, around roads and ports as an important element of whether a country would indeed be resilient. So the second thing I want to focus on is really the role of the private sector. And here I think, as DuPont pioneer, what we've heard is that even in us commissioning the EIU to provide and to prepare this index, what we wanted to ensure is that there was a common language around which stakeholders and diverse stakeholders, as the ones we have in this room, could really have a conversation about how we can make changes around food and nutrition security globally. And so that's one role we see for the private sector, is working alongside the public sector in addressing and providing that the indicators and an empirical basis for talking about food and nutritional security. The second thing that the private sector can do, and once again I'm drawing on what we're actually doing on the continent and worldwide, is that we can work with the public sector to make changes. And here in Ethiopia, as Khalid mentioned, DuPont is working with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Agriculture Transformation Agency to look at how do we support smallholder farmers to become more productive. And yes, that's only one element, as we've described, in a very complex process of making smallholder farmers more resilient, but it's an important component because as smallholder farmers can produce more, they're better able to diversify their diets, they're better able to spend less on food, and overall get more information about how to improve their circumstances. Also, even the question that was raised on the extension services, we as well, DuPont Pioneer, partner with the extension services here in Ethiopia and in other countries, providing them with additional training and tools so that they can support their smallholder farmers and the communities that they serve. And that's one way that we can also help and work hand in hand with the public sector, who is the public sector in terms of providing the quantity of extension workers, but then also supporting on the improvement of the quality of the extension services that's provided. The third point has to be more on the role of the public sector. And certainly from this morning, a lot has been said on the role of the public sector in terms of providing the right policies to support agriculture and to support food and nutrition security in countries. We heard a lot about the fact that here in Ethiopia, providing information in a timely manner, providing the right information, ensuring that farmers receive support so that they can actually use that information in a very, very effective way is important. We also heard that I think from Hans. Hans was the one who mentioned that food security is actually a function of open trade. And that also is a very critical element of what we need to focus on as we look at countries to see the ones that are more open, or where, as we are here on the continent, where there's so many borders and barriers that actually inhibit or slow the flow of goods and services across countries. That also becomes another important thing. And so as countries focus on providing that enabling environment, that becomes critical. My last point, as the bell tolls, is the index, this index, the Food Security Index, the PANACIA, I think what we heard this morning is that what we're trying to do is to provide a common language, provide a platform around which and on which we can build discussions. And certainly, one of the things that, as we heard from the question that came this morning, is that there's several other indices out there that, if used in conjunction with this index, can help us to really form and formulate better solutions across this space on resilience in food and nutrition security. One of the other things I urge you to do as you go online and look at the index, remember that it's a very interactive tool. So if you disagree with any of the weights that we have in the tool, know that you can put your own weight and see how that influences where countries rank and what the analysis shows. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.